So, DLC development is officially underway, and you know what that means. More roster talk. Adding more content post-launch is a whole different thing than the base roster, and because of that, figuring out who's most likely to join the fight now is a different beast altogether. It's another chance for more fan favorites to get an invite, or for anyone who hasn't had one of theirs make it in yet, it's a chance to finally be let in and not feel so left out any longer. And I figure, why not throw my hat into the ring a second time? Seems like a lot of people enjoy listening to me end up way off the mark for the base roster, so here's who I think we may see for Ultimate's Fighter Pass. For part 1, we're going to be talking about newcomers from Nintendo themselves. Sure, they may not have the shock factor the third parties bring, but damn it, they have merits of their own, and I don't see why they should be ignored just because they aren't as popular to talk about. Fair warning, this won't be a straight up, here's exactly who I think we'll see kind of prediction, because we saw with Smash 4 how difficult DLC is to predict. Instead, I'm going to go over a handful of characters I believe are worth keeping an eye on for various reasons. Frontrunners who I think have the best shot of getting in, plausible candidates who, while not frontrunners, have a good opportunity right now, and conditional picks who could have a legit chance as long as a certain condition is met first. Ready? Let's begin. Well, actually, we should go over a few guidelines first. I know, trust me, it'll be worth it. Best to have an idea of what thought process we'll be following here, right? So here are a few things to keep in mind. The whole relevance thing gets badmouthed a lot, but most of the time it does play some part when it comes to first-party newcomers who aren't deliberate throwback picks to the NES era. It helps when a newcomer is someone the greater player base will recognize, which is why the sole exception lately to this rule is someone who had an entire horde of Smash Ballot support. While a character losing relevance isn't an instant deal breaker, we're best off keeping more eyes on the ones who've been more involved in the last few years, you know? That said, characters can also be too new or have their big role be too recent, depending on when newcomers were chosen. For example, the apparent cutoff for Ultimate's base roster was much earlier than it was for Smash 4. We know the characters for the Fighter Pass were locked in back in November, and the newest pick during Smash 4 DLC made their debut about 7.5 months before their inclusion. Yeah, Corn actually wasn't an early bird pick. Fire Emblem Fates was out in Japan in June 2015, meaning things were more ambiguous than the marketing tool who didn't deserve to get in talk you probably heard back then. Because of these circumstances, I actually think we shouldn't count on seeing anyone from any game set to release in the back half of 2019 or whose release dates we have no idea of even a window of yet. Metroid Prime 4 and Sylux, Luigi's Mansion 3 and King Boo, and Pokemon's 8th generation as a whole are probably too late for this set of DLC. If we get a Wave 2, then sure, they're back on the table, absolutely, but the timing right now makes things ambiguous. But back on topic, there are other things we also want to keep an eye on. Moveset potential is kind of a big deal. I mean, it goes without saying that the easier it is to use source material to put an interesting moveset together, the better, but seriously, it's a really big deal. I see this kind of thing get written off all the time by other speculators. There's this idea that Sakurai can make a moveset for anyone, that movesets must only be cobbled together after the devs have decided who to add. But no, we actually know that movesets are an integral part of the selection process. Sakurai was very upfront during Smash 4 development about one character in particular who got the all clear due to offering so many new abilities that Smash had never seen before, and another whose lack of uniqueness was actually a deal breaker until he found another way in a few years later as a clone. Speaking as someone who's kinda made a thing out of making character concepts, the more there is to work with, the more it helps. Occasional exceptions aside, it's more about what a character can do rather than who they are or what franchise they're from. Which brings me to the next thing we should keep in mind. You gotta remember, the Smash roster isn't meant to be this almighty measure of who matters and who doesn't. We the fans end up treating it like that, but Sakurai and the devs are mostly just looking for interesting new additions. This ideological split of sorts ends up leading to a lot of us fans playing arbiter with the roster and narrowing down choices based on which series need more reps or which ones have enough reps, and it's missing the point. Sure, we know the developers do weigh their options. Sakurai was famously worried about Corrin pushing the envelope too far before his team members reassured him that the character would still be interesting enough to be worth adding, but it's not so simple, you know? Because of that, I think doubling up on newcomers from franchises who already got someone in the base roster is 100% on the table here. Consider how often it's happened in the past. This may have even happened in Ultimate already, depending on how you count Dark, Samus, and Richter. We've seen multiple newcomers from the same home series many times in the past. And because of that, we're better off not insisting on balancing the reps on a roster that isn't intending to do that in the first place. It doesn't mean other franchises are being snubbed or anything, it's just that things aren't so simple, and it doesn't quite mean what we may think it does at first. And speaking of things not being so simple, what about everyone who's already in the game in non-playable form? The assist trophy and me costume list this time around was a murderer's row of deconfirmations, but a lot of them still have a lot of support. I've even seen some people argue that they deserve first dibs. Thing is, I don't think we can trust that. Taking the leap from NPC to playable between games is one thing, but doing it mid-game is another. And while Chrom wound up in this weird gray area where he's still in Robin's final smash despite being an Echo fighter, on the other hand, the costume for Rex was treated with this air of finality as if its existence means Rex himself is out of the running. There's such a gray area here that I don't think we can trust the chances of anyone on the list of summons or anyone who got a new me costume this time around. It's possible, sure, but I think we need proof that Sakurai is willing to prioritize them before we can make that call. And I say that as someone who does still hope Isaac makes it in someday, among other current summons. That said, I think characters with old me costumes grandfathered in from Smash 4 are still fair game. Characters who have standalone headgear without full costumes are probably fair game, and right now I'm on the side of Spirit's not deconfirming anyone. The Spirit list was planned out so long before this batch of DLC would have been narrowed down, and it had been really limiting to go out of their way to exclude anyone they were considering adding in down the line. It just isn't practical, And while we're on the topic of hot button topics, there's another thing that's probably getting blown out of proportion. Ever since Sakurai mentioned that Nintendo themselves are involved in the decision process for DLC, I've seen people jump to conclusions. There's this idea running around that this must mean as many characters as possible are going to be cynical marketing ploys stuck in solely to advertise upcoming games. I mean, being worried about your favorites getting snubbed for not having a specific criteria, that's completely understandable. But how do we know that's actually what's going on? Just because more executive hands are involved than they were before doesn't mean some kind of worst-case scenario must be happening. I mean, especially since this is still the big N here, they've always marched to the beat of their own drums. I just don't buy this notion that we must be getting nothing more than shallow advertising now, or even the idea that any newer characters couldn't possibly have any reasons for inclusion other than to advertise. They can have their own merits, Though, I suppose this is one argument that's a little easier to make now, isn't it? But I think this whole line of thinking is also a sign of something bigger. A mindset, a bad habit that permeates character talk and the Smash community as a whole. Because we need to keep in mind... You see, it's not just this claim that Nintendo must be imposing their will on Sakurai and forcing him to cave to their demands. Have you noticed how the very idea has spread so far so easily? To where half the community is already convinced that is the only possible way things can be going down? This even carries over into arguments for the characters themselves, with all this talk over who deserves it the most, who has the right status for it, and who are just unworthy peasants who should learn their place. I know, it sounds like I'm exaggerating, but haven't you noticed that kind of feel to a lot of discussion? I think we get so caught up in power struggles and acts of dominance that we assume everything must be that way, but it's not, Not everything has to be so win-lose. I mean, we're Nintendo fans here. We've all been ridiculed for that at some point in our lives, right? So, how about we take a step back and try not to play right into that same vicious cycle? And real fast before we move on for real, there's a misquote going around that's led to people drawing the wrong conclusions about who to expect as DLC. No, Reggie did not say at the Game Awards that every DLC pick will be from new series. He actually said they'll be new to the series, as in they haven't been playable in Smash before. And, well, we got every veteran already, so of course they'll all be newcomers from here on out. Misinformation's a pain, huh? Think of how many people have lost hope over words that weren't actually spoken. All because something was spread to the ends of the internet before it could be fact-checked. And with that, on to the characters themselves. I know, about damn time. Sorry to keep you waiting like that, but it felt like we needed to cover that stuff first, It needed to be said. To begin, we're going to talk about a couple characters I think are frontrunners for DLC. Not saying to pencil them in or anything because we saw last time how hard DLC is to predict, but I think these are the most likely first-party characters to get the nod. Up first, a rising star that I'm honestly surprised didn't make the base game. Bandana Dee! As King Dedede's right-hand guardsman, who also happens to be friends with Kirby, Bandana Dee's been involved in some way in most of the Pink Puffball's recent adventures, ranging from support roles to cameos to being outright playable. At this point, it's not a stretch to say he's become main character number 4 of the series. Basically, if you've played a modern Kirby game, you know this guy and probably have a soft spot for him. Bandana Dee is one of those characters who has a huge following among fans of his home series, yet has people outside the Kirby fandom scratching their heads a bit. Chalk it up to his big break coming within the last 10 years or so and not being from most of our childhoods. But he's got a lot going for him, as my old character concept for him can attest to, and not to get too far into deserving talk because it's not that simple, but at this point a Smash invite wouldn't be a surprise at all. Of course, a big reason for that is because he's got a lot of potential as a fighter, leveraging his signature abilities with the personality of a lovable underdog, eager to prove himself at every turn. He's endearing in the way Luigi is, you know? Bandana Dee's fighting style would revolve around his mastery of the spear, which just so happens to be a weapon type Smash has never seen before. While that doesn't mean we need to represent the idea of a spear fighter, it means our first one would certainly be unique, don't you think? You could even combine spear techniques with the parasol he used in Kirby Battle Royale, or even other stuff associated with his species like a beam wand to reference the offshoot Waddle Doos, or even the vehicles used by the Waddle Dee in Kirby 64 that may or may not be him. Needless to say, this character is much more than just some mook with a hat. Bandana Dee could also rectify the lack of a new Kirby stage so far, bringing in the series' famous dreamlike settings and amazing visuals. Maybe Sakurai and the DLC team could pull from the game that put him on the map with a stage based on the first world of Kirby's Return to Dreamland. Or perhaps they'd want to go more relevant, with a stage based on Star Allies. Maybe even the place that allows Bandana Dee to be playable in that game to begin with. A lot of options there. For our other frontrunner, we got another rising star. Or someone who's shown signs of becoming one soon. Because while the timing may not look good for any games coming out in late 2019, I think anything except for the first half of this year is still fair game. Sure to make certain fans seethe with rage, it's Edelgard! If there's any sign of just how much Fire Emblem has grown since the days of Melee, it's how much pomp and circumstance its upcoming entry is getting. Fire Emblem Three Houses looks promising so far, and the timing is just right for one of its protagonists to get an invite. And it'd be a powder keg in the making. Seems like Fire Emblem is a very polarizing topic among Smash fans nowadays. You got a lot of people who've grown to love it or at least enjoy the games, but there's also some very vocal critics who resent Fire Emblem for what they view as stealing the spotlight of series they care more about. Well, as we've already discussed, Sakurai pulling the trigger on another Fire Emblem character wouldn't be meant as a middle finger to the other franchises. It wouldn't even necessarily be advertising the upcoming game when things aren't so clear-cut in that regard. If anything, Edelgard's chances lie in how unique of a pick she'd be on her own terms. Though this does hinge on Three Houses being a first half-ish release. If it gets delayed, things would get murky, Edelgard would probably lose her frontrunner spot, and she may even fall out of contention entirely for this wave and have to hope that a second wave happens. Of course, the big reason people have their eye on her is her apparent weapon of choice. Edelgard is an axe wielder. She'd be able to bring another brand new weapon type into Smash and combine it with the many secondary abilities we've seen hints at so far. How about some magic to go with her axe swings? Maybe some combat arts like the ones in Fire Emblem Echoes? Or maybe something that uses Three Houses' new combat formation mechanic. We've only got a glimpse so far, but even that is enough to see just how much potential she has. And who knows what stage options are lying in wait. Even the clips of the military academy and the reveal trailer show some good places to fight. I feel like I should also mention an alternative option from Three Houses, the apparent avatar character Byleth. He isn't as popular a pick since all we've seen him do so far is instruct people and swing a sword, and you know how certain fans get about the latter, but he may yet be capable of a long list of unique stuff that we don't know about yet. After all, Sakurai and the DLC team would be aware of much more about Three Houses than we currently are. So just keep him in mind going forward, yeah? Next up are our plausible picks. These are characters I hesitate to put in the frontrunner category that are still notable enough that I think they have, well, a plausible chance. Up first, a peculiar counterpart who can't take two-dimensional steps without stumbling headlong into controversy. Paper Mario! It's worn a few hats over the years, but the Paper Mario series is always there to provide an alternate, off-kilter take on the Mario universe. As a recognizable face with a load of potential, the Thin Man himself may have a shot at joining the fight despite how at odds his fanbase is. First things first, I want to try and be inclusive. I think every Paper Mario game has some moveset potential to offer, even the one that's actually bad. Despite the varying genres and varying opinions across the series, they all present a more oddball take on Mario, and we want to embody that in Smash. Restricting our scope to only the parts that we personally like in some misguided attempt to declare what the real Paper Mario is and gatekeep the rest would miss the point and inhibit the entire character concept. It's something I had to work around with my own concept for him back in the day. And while we have a Mario newcomer coming down the pipeline already, we know for a fact now that they've doubled up before many times. Overall, since Paper Mario's games look and feel like a quirkier take on the original Mario, we want to exemplify that in Smash as well. To do that, we could have him play like a quirkier, more mix-up heavy take on Mario's playstyle, while having his actual moveset be completely unique. And why not? With his absolutely massive list of jumping and hammer moves, field techniques, and the various items and characters Paper Mario has interacted with across his games. Bear in mind, while I think the partner characters from the first two games have something to offer, I don't think they're a necessity if they'd overcomplicate the moveset. Again, the idea is to make a clean and coherent character concept, not make a statement, so it pays to be pragmatic here. And of course, there are a lot of options for a Paper Mario stage that go beyond the one we already have. The first level of Color Splash would work well enough, with its interesting visuals and that one set piece where enemies roll up the path in an attempt to kill you. Or there's also the stage that battles in the Thousand Year Door take place on, see, I didn't forget, complete with various set pieces and props to interact with and crowd members interfering. Or, I don't know, maybe a location from Super Paper Mario to use the flipping mechanic to transition between two wildly different layouts. See how much potential there is? There's a lot of it. Don't worry, our next character doesn't have any controversy to worry about, but might have a couple things that could complicate her chances. Spinning into action, it's Dixie Kong! As Diddy Kong's girlfriend, adventuring companion, and occasionally the one who bails him out of trouble, Dixie got her big break in the now legendary Donkey Kong Country 2. With Diddy setting off for the Kremling homeland to rescue DK, she insisted on coming along to help, and in the process proved herself every bit as competent of a hero as he was. Dixie's one of those characters with a quieter support base. She may not have as many super vocal fans that push her atop popularity polls, but a lot of people seem to think she's a cool character who could be an interesting addition to Smash. Her biggest questions are whether a second DK newcomer could get a look, and whether the Meat Hat themed after her puts her out of the running or not. But as we know, double-ups have happened plenty of times by now, and having one be from the base game and another be DLC shouldn't be too much of a problem, and we don't actually know if having just new headgear is as potentially damning as a full costume seems to be. It's enough that I think she still ranks under plausible, yeah? There are a few different ways Dixie's moveset could be handled, depending on how much of Diddy's moveset you wanted to use as a baseline. Anywhere from semi-clone to full unique to Echo Fighter could be on the table, though we know Echo Fighters won't be part of the Fighter Pass, so let's lean more toward the former two. We take a confident and outgoing personality eager to prove she can hang with the big boys just fine, thank you very much, and combine it with a mix of close-up attacks and some mid-range stuff using her prehensile ponytail, and you have the makings of a concept that captures who Dixie is as a character. You could even use her hair as a tether grab, and work in her helicopter spin mechanics from both Donkey Kong Country 2 and 3 as a side special, and from Tropical Freeze as a double jump. Something I actually did myself with my own character concept for back in the day, and it helped create something that only she can really do. So how about stages? Homecoming Hijinks actually isn't the cliched jungle fair since it's frozen over, and could bring some interesting mechanics with breakaway platforms or a snow-mad ship sailing by in the background and opening fire on the fighters. Or Gangplank Galleon could come in and pull a double duty as a home stage for two characters. Or maybe we might find ourselves in a hostile world hidden within Crocodile Isle that was sealed away for good reason. For our final plausible pick, okay, I'm going to cheat a little here. I couldn't actually decide on a single character for this one because several from the series are viable options. So I'm just going to include them all and we'll see how this goes. Hoping to stick their collective second chance, it's Rhythm Heaven! Among the more unsung of Nintendo's many IPs, Rhythm Heaven carved out a niche for itself with its rhythmic gameplay and eclectic cast of characters. We've reason to believe the series was looked at back in Smash 4, so maybe this could be their chance for real. Thing is, Rhythm Heaven's got a lot of notable characters. The Chorus Kids, Karate Joe, the Wrestler and Reporter, even the hosts of various entries like Marshall and Tibby. But calling any one of them the face of the franchise is difficult. And so I figure for character speculation, we're best off doing a catch-all of sorts that covers the series as a whole. Any of these characters could potentially be chosen, and I wouldn't be surprised to see any of them get the nod if Rhythm Heaven got a chance to take the stage. Cop-out? What cop-out? I don't know what you're talking about. And while most of these characters are best known for specific minigames, they could reasonably pull from others as well, meaning a lot of moveset potential is at their fingertips. Their instruments? Vocal cords? And of course, there's a gimmick that every single one of them could use in their potential moveset, incorporating rhythm itself. I like the idea of having certain attacks be multi-input ones that follow a certain beat, and if you press the button in tempo, you keep the attack going and deal extra damage or maybe add some other extra effects for all kinds of stuff. All to fold right into the idea of having the player feel like they're playing music without the hundreds of hours of practice required. As far as stage ideas go, I admit I'm not the most familiar with Rhythm Heaven, but I think what could work well here is something that transitions between various minigames. Maybe a simple transforming stage like Pokemon Stadium or Flat Zone, or one like WarioWare that rewards players who complete objectives. Now we're going to go into what I call conditional picks. These are characters who need some certain event or occurrence to happen to reopen the door for them. But if these circumstances do come to pass, they will have a very legitimate chance. And for our first conditional character, someone from a rapidly growing franchise that is this close to leaving her behind, Elma! It's actually impressive just how far Xenoblade has come. From sleeper hit all the way to RPG juggernaut with 3 games and counting, its stock for the future just keeps rising. And as the more or less main protagonist of offshoot Xenoblade Chronicles X, Elma might have a lot going for her, if the stars align. Thing is, Xenoblade X dates back to 2015, and a newer Xenoblade game has appeared in the time since. And while Elma did pop up there as a part of its DLC, it's via an optional extra non-canon thing. Which raises the question, would Sakurai and the DLC team be willing to look further back than the most recent main entries for first-party newcomers? That's a question I don't have an answer for. But if they're willing to take that risk, Elma has a lot of upside, and with recent counterpart Rex relegated to a Mii costume and described in a way that implies he's probably out of the running to be fully playable for the time being, well, who knows, right? As a military commander tasked with helping humanity rebuild on an alien world after Earth's destruction, Elma sports a serious, no-nonsense personality that gives the sillier fighters and villains someone to play off of. Can already picture her crossing her arms and glaring at Wario for calling her the fun police, can't ya? When in actual combat, Elma employs a roguelike fighting style with an emphasis on movement, evasion, and flanking opponents while attacking with dual knives and dual beam pistols in tandem. Each of her attacks would use one set or the other, switching between them automatically based on the attack she's performing, just like in her game. And since she's a Xenoblade character, Elma has a long list of combat arts to pull from, many of which would grant extra effects like increased damage, status buffs, or much more if she hits opponents from certain directions or under certain conditions. Think on your feet like a real commander, and you'd be rewarded. I did my best to touch on this in my own character concept for her, though fair warning, it's an older one, so it's kinda dated. And of course, Elma would also bring with her one of Planet Mira's breathtaking locales to use as a stage. From the simple and rustic Primordia, to the hostile jungles of Noctilum, to the futuristic city of New Los Angeles, there's a lot to choose from. The dreamlike continent of Sylvalum would be my personal pick. So as we touched on earlier, the odds of us getting a new Pokemon from the upcoming 8th generation probably aren't that great due to iffy timing unless we get a second wave of DLC after this one. But what if Sakurai and crew aren't done with Gen 7 just yet? What if they're still interested in a character who didn't reach its full potential until after the apparent cutoff date for the roster? With the sun setting fast on its chances, next up is Lycanroc! Okay, before you roll your eyes and click away, hear me out. Pokemon is a massive franchise with a lot of rare and unique characters to pull from. And yet, despite Ultimate having spirits and music from several games from late 2017 and even 2018, there is nothing in the base game from Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon aside from a couple Pokemon Trainer alts. It's all from the first versions of Sun and Moon. Even the music arrangements are. While I don't think it means content from these games were deliberately left out, I do think it means that this character who took until late 2017 to really hit its stride probably did so too late for the base roster. I don't know if the DLC team is willing to give Gen 7 another look, and it's now or never with the next generation set to take the reins at the end of the year, but we have seen them double up many times before. And if it turns out they're interested, we are talking about a character who's grown over the past year and a half to be as promoted as its generation's starters the same way Lucario and Zoroark were, even carrying the team MVP role in the anime like Greninja did. Seriously, look it up. But why would they be interested in Lycanroc to begin with? Well, as a rock type, its mastery over earth elemental attacks makes it basically our last chance to get an earthbender for a very long time, since Isaac is probably out of the running. But there's more here to offer too. The Dusk form that's had the biggest spotlight has a fully quadrupedal build that doesn't rely on prehensile plant parts or a passenger to attack. We got a character in for the sake of having a full-blown wrestler, so how about our first full-on beast? Not only that, this particular form has a special berserk state that shows up when attacking in the games, with a major character arc in the anime about learning to control it. A playable Lycanroc in Smash could tap into that for temporary boosts like increased power or faster frame data after landing certain attacks. A personality as dualistic as night and day themselves, patient and pacifistic normally, yet will retaliate hard when necessary. It's sort of like if Bruce Banner had full control over the Hulk. But what new stages could the Alola region offer? Places like the Ether Paradise Wildlife Reserve, the Altar of the Sun, or Moon, or a stage that travels between dimensions in ultraspace would all make for battles as climactic as the ones that originally took place there. We didn't get a new Pokemon stage in the base game for the first time ever, so there's a lot still available. For our last conditional pick, I want to turn toward a franchise that a lot of Smash fans feel is neglected. It's been a very long time since we've picked up someone new from The Legend of Zelda. Longer still since we got someone whose moveset wasn't derived from an existing one. So, what if Sakurai and crew listened to those pleas and went out of their way to include a Zelda newcomer? Taking aim is our final candidate, Ravalli! Breath of the Wild was such a hit that I figure we'll see its influence for a long time for completely understandable reasons. If Sakurai comes looking for another Zelda newcomer, the 4 fallen champions are relevant and distinct enough to be worth giving a look. And out of them, I think a certain egotistical Birdman may make the strongest case. It actually took me a while to narrow down which champion to go with. To be honest, all 4 have their own merits. This is just the one I settled on. Picking a newcomer for the sake of giving a series more representation ain't usually Sakurai's MO, but with all this talk of listening to the fans this time around, there's a chance he might make an exception here. Emphasis on might. If that came to pass, Ravalli would definitely make his presence known in battle, arrogant and boastful, yet with the skill to back it up. His design and personality play their Falco inspiration close to the vest, but his build and abilities are plenty enough to still stand out. As a master of the bow, he'd take archery to far greater levels than what we've seen with the Lynx and Pit's neutral specials, using his Great Eagle bow's ability to fire 3 arrows in a single volley for all kinds of trick shots and cover fire. Then combine this with Ravalli's learned ability to bend the winds to his will to stir up rising gales and cyclones to buffet your foes. Though preferably without too many wind boxes, you know how easily those things end up overpowered. And even some craftier stuff like wielding a bladed arrow like a knife at close range. Let your foes know they're dealing with a champion, not some airheaded knight coasting by on their lineage. While we have a stage from Breath of the Wild already, we've seen past examples of one game getting 2 or more stages, and there are plenty of locales to work with here. How about Ravalli's personal divine beast, either before or after Link cleanses it of Ganon's blight? Or maybe a larger stage based on the steep cliffs and valleys Ravalli once called home, or the steeper, snowy mountains located just north of there. Let's be honest, just about anywhere in this game would work as a second stage. There are so damn many memorable places. And there you have it. A selection of first-party characters who I think are most worth keeping an eye on as Ultimate's DLC development unfolds. There's still a surprising amount to work with despite how many fan favorites had their chances potentially handcuffed at the last minute. We may have a lot of Nintendo's biggest stars on the roster already, but as you can see, and as any fans of these characters can attest to, we're nowhere near the bottom of the barrel. All you gotta do is look back in the barrel every now and then and see what new stars have risen up. Real quick, some honorable mentions. I touched on the other champions and Byleth already, and I stand by thinking they'd work just as well if things go a little differently. Captain Toad could still be interesting, though they'd have to do something about him showing up as a stage element on New Donk City Hall. Removing, replacing, something to that extent if they chose him. Maybe some potential retro picks, since we didn't get one of those in the base game, and perhaps the DLC team is still interested in another throwback. And who knows, maybe we could get more Echo Fighters outside the pass as their own separate things. Wishful thinking, I guess. And there are plenty of other characters I haven't mentioned who could have a chance too. I'm not some arbiter of who matters and who doesn't. Just because I didn't mention them doesn't mean they don't matter. So, hope this was an interesting enough take on the usual DLC talk you probably saw everywhere the last couple months to be worth listening to for way longer than I thought it'd be. Gust Fighters may dominate Smash speculation, but damn it, Nintendo's own characters still have a lot to offer too, and they're still worth talking about. Maybe I've even helped sell you on a few of these. What about you? Which first-party characters are you still hoping to see make it as DLC? Be sure to leave a comment, like, subscribe, click the little bell icon. You know this whole song and dance YouTube makes us do by now. Special thanks to everyone who waited so long for this video to be finished despite all the setbacks I've had, especially my graphic design guy for sticking with me this whole time and making everything look far better than I could have managed alone. Major thanks to my patrons for sticking around all this time. Hope the wait was worth it. If you're interested in supporting my content, check out the link in the description or just wait for the end screen. Some neat rewards to be had, like the design notes behind each video or spoilers on upcoming plans. And so, we'll continue this next time when we delve into potential third-party DLC. Should be interesting.